Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, March 18th, 2013. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in the control room ready to answer the calls when you dial us up to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Real quick technical note before we get into Cyprus and all that portends. If you're watching on Justin TV and it seems like the video quality isn't exactly what it was before, over the weekend, instead of dealing with all the problems of the Skype router, including or the Belkin router, including Skype not working, Kaspersky Antivirus apparently false positived a component of Adobe's Creative Suite 5, and I couldn't fix it, so I went to do a reinstall. And when I ran the uninstaller for Adobe's Creative Suite 5, it managed to cripple every single piece of Adobe software I had, including the Acrobat Reader browser and the Flash Media encoder that I've been using with Justin TV. So at that point, I threw Creative Studio 5 away. I've gone back to Photoshop 7 and the 2004 version of all media tools that I use for web development, and I've just had it with Adobe. Used to be a good company. They seem to be just trying to cash in on their reputation. For those of you who are doing high-def video editing and creation over at a company called ES4U, they're hungry and they're putting out some good video converters. I bought their AVS Editor 6. It's very inexpensive compared to anything from Adobe, and it's 1080p editing and Blu-ray creation all in package. I'll be honest, I haven't used it on the next video for my wife. It looks much simpler, more intuitive, and certainly more bang for the buck. So we're running our Justin feed without the Adobe Flash Creator, which is also what got destroyed in this absolute meltdown. And we have Adobe. I absolutely do not want any more of their products on my machine. If it can't be done with HTML5, then I'm not going to bother. I don't want to do PDFs even anymore because they're huge security risks as well. Now, on to important things and away my personal computer woes here. Remember when I keep saying to only keep as much money to cover your bills and rest at home? The people of Cyprus just found out why. Over the weekend, with no warning at all, this 10% taxation on all savings accounts, interest earned, even some checking accounts, was put into place electronically. And the banks were closed today. It was a holiday, but now they're going to close them until Thursday while they're trying to deal with this situation about the bailout. Apparently, the European Union's solution to the failure of the banks is to go out and just steal from the money. That's what this, I don't care what they call it, levy, tax, whatever. They just went out to steal from the poor, to give to the rich, to prop up the banks. And, of course, the head of the Cyprus bank came out immediately and said, look, this is a one-time only. There's no reason to think it's ever going to happen again. Whereupon the bankers up in Germany suggested that Italy may be next. And the idea here that we all need to be thinking about is the European Central Bank and the EU and the IMF went in and did this to the people of Cyprus without the permission of the Cypriot government. They were supposed to vote yesterday on whether they wanted to go along with this deal. The vote has been postponed until tomorrow. I would not be surprised if they postponed it again. This has sent shockwaves all over Europe, all over the United States. It's just outright theft. They're looting the people to prop up the banks. And like I said, they're closing the Cyprus banks until Thursday. We're going to take a break here. I'll be back with this after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, welcome back to the show here, and the phone lines are open, as I said before, 800-313-9443. Manny is answering the phones. We're talking about Cyprus. This is a major, major event that has happened. Basically, the European Union has taken it as a policy position that the ordinary citizens of any European country are going to be held financially liable for the crimes and stupidity of the banks. The reason Cyprus is in trouble is because of their close political association with Greece, they invested in Greek bonds. That failed. There was also, not too long ago, a major disaster where one of these confiscated shipments of explosives that were seized in the middle of the ocean were being stored in Cyprus, and they blew up. They were just stored improperly, and they blew up and destroyed one of the power stations. So they're having to build and pay for this new power station. All kinds of bad mistakes were made. And Cyprus is in trouble. Of course, any nation under a private central bank issuing the public currencies, a loan and interest, they're all in trouble. There isn't a nation on earth with a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest that isn't in trouble. They just do not exist. It is part of the symptom. So anyway, they're going to keep the banks in Cyprus shut until Thursday. This is not going to prevent a run. The first day the banks are open, there's going to be a run. And it won't just be in Cyprus. All the delay is going to do is fan the flames of rage. And remember, Cyprus has a history of rioting. They had a big one just last year. But the idea is apparently that you, ordinary people who do not work for the banks and do not make the policy decisions, your wealth is now fair game to prop up these banking systems. This is an act of desperation on their part. And we need to ask, when did banks become more important than people? When did government become more loyal to the paper money than to citizens? That's a question we really do need to ask here. Now, already there's a little bit of backpedaling, and you've probably seen a couple of headlines where the Euro officials they're going to be flexible on the Cypriot bank levy. And then when you read further on down in the story, it says, what's important is that the planned revenue of 5.8 billion euros remain. In other words, what they're saying is they're going to grab exactly the same amount of money. What they're trying to figure out is who can they steal it from that is least likely to set fire to the bankers and then beat out the flames with the politicians. That's what it is. Now, I got an email asking, well, look, if the banks can just print up new money like crazy, why is this a problem? Well, from the money junkies' point of view, it is a problem because the more the central banks print new money, the more the money already owned by the money junkies loses value. And so from the money junkies' point of view, it's better to loot the people to preserve the value of the currency than create new currency which makes their own wealth less. That's what they're thinking here. And it's a very, very dangerous situation because this happened to the people of Cyprus with no warning whatsoever. The European Central Bank and the Cyprus banks put the lock on their funds in their accounts before the Cyprus government had even voted on the bailout. Now, this vote that's coming up to accept this deal, the president of Cyprus is already saying if they don't go along with this, don't go along with looting the bank accounts of the Cyprus people, that Cyprus will go bankrupt, which will trigger those credit default swaps that Wall Street was selling, and will force Cyprus out of the European Union. And I think from the point of view of the people of Cyprus, I think they would rather the government go bankrupt and the banks fail and the European Union collapse than go on simply having their money stolen. Now, this has already spread beyond the borders of Cyprus because apparently there are a lot of British expatriates who are living there in Cyprus. A lot of Russians are in Cyprus. They're having their money taken. Now, the British government has already said they will compensate British nationals in Cyprus for the loss. So now the British people, the subjects in Great Britain, are going to be picking up the cost of this tab. They're just running the money around as fast as they can, trying to cover all the debts. And as I've said before, you can picture the Eurozone as a single boat with a seat for all the member nations. And in the bottom of this boat, there are 11 holes. And there's only 10 corks. And right now, Cyprus has decided to yank the cork out from under the seat in the boat on which the people of Cyprus are sitting and shove it into the hole underneath the seat where the banks are. But the boat is still going to sink. There's no way to save this boat until Europe has as many corks as holes, and that will not happen as long as there are private central banks that drill more holes than they loan out corks. In other words, issuing all the public currencies alone at interest. It can't be fixed. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, up in Germany, Commerzbank is suggesting that this needs to be done in Italy. And they're starting to talk about it needs to be done in Greece. In other words, if they get away with it in Cyprus, every nation in Europe is going to get hit with this. And once they do it in Europe, it will happen here. So you need to keep that in mind. What they just did in Cyprus, there is no reason for it not to happen here. Remember, Roosevelt did it back in 1933. Confiscated the gold to prop up the banks. And gave out a bunch of worthless paper, so you felt like it was a fair deal. They just did the same thing in Cyprus. They're telling everybody, oh, in exchange for all your money that we just took away from you, you will get an equity position in the bank. What a wonderful deal. This people of Cyprus just lost between 10 and 15% of their personal savings, in exchange for which they'll get a share in a bank that is already bankrupt. Such a wonderful deal. This is just wealth confiscation. They can call it levy or taxes or national emergency. They are stealing from the people to prop up the banks. Now, probably on Friday, there's going to be a run on the banks of Cyprus. There could be a run in Spain, Italy, and Greece. In other words, this is going to wind up costing the Eurozone banks far more than the 5.9 billion euros they were hoping to raise from this little stunt. And I'm seeing a lot of articles from people saying, I'm trotting off to my bank tomorrow and I'm getting my money under my own control. And I need to be very, very careful here, because a while back the U.S. government did pass a law saying that anybody inciting a run on the banks could be thrown in jail. So I'm not inciting a run on banks. I am just repeating the common sense advice we've been giving you for a long, long time. You should only have as much money in the banks as it takes to cover your obligations. Keep the rest under your own control, in your home, buried in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation, in silver, in gold. The banks are no longer trustworthy. Cyprus just proved that. The European Central Bank just proved that. The European Union just proved that. Your money is not safe in the banks, because the biggest bank robbers of all, the private central banks, can push a button and your wealth can vanish. And by the way, the original plan for the levy against the people of Cyprus was for 40%. 40% vanishes overnight from your account inside the bank. And then they run back down to this 9%, 15% for extremely rich people. And they thought everybody'd say, oh, well, that's a good compromise. No, it isn't. It's still theft. If somebody walks into your home with a gun and you have $500 in your pocket, and the robber says, look, I know you're hungry, only give me $50 and it's not a good deal. He still robbed you for $50. So Greece is still trembling on the edge of a coup d'etat. There may be a run on the banks there because the Greek and Cyprus economies were very tightly linked. And by golly, we can count on that Greek prime minister to take decisive action during this time of crisis. He's promising Jewish leaders he will pass a law against Holocaust denial. Now there is a leader, and there is a statesman. Now, despite the statements by the Cyprus banks that this was a one-time only emergency, there is absolutely no reason for them not to consider doing this everywhere else. And you need to take that into consideration when you're planning your own survival. Cyprus is effectively a beta test. The private central bankers just committed bank robbery in broad daylight, and they want to see if they can get away with it. Because if they can get away with it in Cyprus, then it'll be Italy and Greece and Spain, and then here. Now, Moscow has come out very much angered about this situation because, again, there are a lot of Russian nationals living in Cyprus, some of whom are very wealthy. And so this is impacting the Russian nationals. And because these people in Cyprus are linked into Russia's economy, the ripples from this will affect Russia's economy as well. Over at 911forum.org, they're basically saying this is going to signal a repeat of the 1930s chaos as they try and move the money around fast enough to cover the fact that there is more debt than cash. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the fallout from this theft by computer from the bank accounts of the citizens of Cyprus by the bankers of Europe, the private central bankers. They bypassed Cyprus's government completely on this. Cyprus had not even voted on this new bailout deal, and the money was locked in the accounts. Now, normally in a capitalist society, the rules are, and that's the rules here in the United States of America, when a bank is going to go bust, the equity holders lose first. Then the preferred shareholders, followed by the unsecured debtors, then the secured debtors. Depositors in the bank are the absolute last in line to lose money. So this tells us what terrible shape the banks of Europe are in right now, that they're going out to loot the people. Remember we talked about back when Christine Lagarde was out there saying it doesn't matter how the debt was created. It doesn't matter at all. You, the people, must pay it. Half of the debt that the Greek people are dealing with was arrived at through fraud and criminality between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs. But in Christine Lagarde's view, and apparently it's an article of faith of all the money junkies, yes, even if your own leadership conspired against you to plunge your nation deeper into debt, you must pay it. After all, it's your fault you let it happen, even though you knew nothing about it. I'm not sure what other rationality there is. Now, interestingly enough, over at TrevorLoudon.com, they had an article screaming that the IMF are behaving like Marxists, taxing and seizing personal funds in Cyprus, and how the American media or the global media is really not paying any more attention to it than they think they can get away with. We'll talk about that a little bit longer, but I want to make a point here. Marxists would rob the rich to give to the poor. Sorry, Robin Hood, that is the way it is. It is fascists who rob the poor to give to the rich. And that's what we're seeing. Fascism. Not communism, not socialism, fascism. Private central banking is an inherently fascistic system. Let me give you the definitions again for those of you who were asleep in the last class. Under capitalism, if you make money, you get to keep it. If you lose money, you live with that debt and you accept that responsibility. That's freedom. The freedom to succeed and the freedom to fail. And the responsibility to deal with that. That's capitalism. Under socialism or communism, if you make money, it is taxed away from you for the support of society. If you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can pick up and start again. Under fascism, if you make money, you get to keep it. And if you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses. That's what all these bailouts and TARP and tranches or whatever else they're going to call it are. Looting the people to cover business losses from bad banking, while the bankers themselves are becoming insanely rich. It is the classic fascistic model. Fascism is the alignment of government and corporate financial power against the general population. That's Benito Mussolini's definition, and we all know that Mussolini got the gold medal for being a fascist jerk. So we're not dealing with Marxism, we're dealing with fascism, and it's just prominently on display. The European Union basically has thrown Cyprus to the wolves here, and we're going to see it elsewhere. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Roosevelt did it to the United States in 1933 with the gold confiscation. Our government's been doing it to you, the American people, since 2008 with the real estate foreclosure fraud. Remember, we talked about this before. The government let these banks and mortgage companies get away with fraudulent foreclosures, robo-signing, false notary, all the rest of that in order to take the value of your home and put it on the bank balance sheet to keep them solvent. So it's already been going on here, just very sneaky and underhanded and designed to make you think it's your fault. You've lost everything you worked for in life. But what just happened in Cyprus is in plain view, and it woke a lot of people up and has angered and shocked a lot of people. Down in Argentina, they're starting to make a grab for pensions to cover their shortfall. Same thing we're hearing here, where the U.S. government is going to make you cash in your IRAs and 401ks and buy special treasury bonds for a government-managed retirement system, forgetting that we already have a government-managed retirement system called Social Security that you have paid into your entire working life only to see the government take that money and spend it someplace else. And now they can't pay it back. Now, if you turn over to the corporate news, you might be forgiven for not thinking Cyprus is all that big a deal, because they got other stuff to tell you. Oh, they found weapons and explosives in a dorm room in a Florida college campus. Horror of horrors. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're just getting a headline here that the British government has now stopped all pension payments to British expats living in Cyprus to prevent the Cyprus government from seizing that 10% tax. So now those expats have not only lost 10% of their savings accounts, their bank accounts, now their pensions are cut off. Good solution there, Britain. Good solution. Meanwhile, here, as I was starting to talk about in the American media, Cyprus, yeah, there's some unhappiness over there, but nothing to think about. You know, they're out there in full distraction mode. They're talking about this story where they found explosives and weapons in a dorm room in a Florida college and improvised explosive devices. So they're out there screaming, pay no attention to the banks stealing customers' money in Cyprus. Ignore the fact that the IMF is already calling for more of the same on Italy, and bank runs are starting in Greece and Spain. And definitely don't think about how it could happen here in the U.S. without any warning at all, as the bankers try their last desperate attempt to prop up this failed Ponzi scheme private central bank. Don't think about any of that. We have bombs. We have assault weapons. We have improvised explosive devices. We have domestic terrorists. Ooh, scary, 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 scary. Just think about that. Think about nothing but that. And leave your money in your bank account where we know it, where it is. Thank you for your cooperation, citizen. Apparently over at USA Today, their banner headline today is how great the stock market is doing. It's gone mad. It's doing wonderful. And at the moment, yes, they've managed to just barely get it back up in the green. Rest of the world got hammered last night. Asian markets, less the Europe markets. And you're seeing these huge upshoves. And, you know, and of course, Hillary is endorsing same-sex marriage. That's a big news story. Beyonce, the trial of, regarding Michael Jackson's death and all the rest of that stuff. They're in full distraction mode about what just happened. They don't want you even thinking about the possibility it could happen here. They don't want you thinking about this turmoil that this move has caused. And for those of you watching the stock market right now, given what just happened, the fact that the American markets opened really low and they're back up there just flirting with break even, if you had any doubts the stock market is being manipulated in this country, this should end it. And we know why it's being manipulated, because all these Wall Street firms that were buying huge blocks of stock to stimulate demand and keep the stock prices up, they're now trapped. Those blocks of stock they own are on their balance sheet. They can't survive a major market downturn, or they'll be instantly insolvent. They're in the point right now where cheating and fraud is all they've got left to keep the system going, and they can't sustain that forever. Now, whenever Cyprus finally gets around to having this vote, and the president of Cyprus, Nikos Anastasiadis, and remember, just a couple of weeks ago in his election campaign, he promised depositors were safe. Man, he didn't even get re-elected yet, and that promise is already broken. But the reality is that the portion of the Cypriot legislature that supports him on this bailout is the minority. This thing could get voted down. Cyprus could, in effect, vote to leave the euro and to default on all of its debts, and that will trigger that credit default swap firestorm in New York. Now, over at Market Watch earlier today, they were asking, what will Cyprus do to Wall Street's rally? Everybody understood that this should have a negative impact, but here we are with the Dow just getting shoved right back up there. It's just barely in the green right now. They're fighting a desperate war against reality. And it's absolute proof, this counterintuitive behavior of the stock market tells you it's being rigged. It's just another fraud. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, in an interview with King World News, is saying the U.S. financial system has to collapse. It does. It's a giant pyramid. He went further to say J.P. Morgan is now threatening the stability of the entire global financial system. He says if the Federal Reserve loses control, and it looks like it already has, it's all going to be coming apart. And again, our common sense advice to everybody listening to this broadcast, and we have been saying this for months, it is not in response to what happened in Cyprus. You should only keep as much money in the bank as you need to cover your outstanding obligations and keep the rest under your own control. If it's in the bank, the bankers can steal it with a few strokes on a keyboard. If you have it as cash or gold and silver in your pocket, they can't touch it unless they kick down your door and say, give us everything you've got, which will start happening if they succeed in disarming the American people. So anyway, it's just a... yeah. Now, apparently getting ready for Obama's trip to Israel this week, as if absolutely nothing else in the world was going on, Israel is going to press Obama to attack Syria. Now, what looks like is going on is that Netanyahu is not going to back off stealing more of Palestine. Obama is not going to back off of staying out of Iran because he doesn't want to go to war with Russia. And so they're going to shake hands and say, well, let's have a war in Syria to keep things going. The new Israeli housing minister is pledging more settlement building. He says it's absurd not to build Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Avigdor Lieberman is out there saying that anybody who throws a stone at an Israeli tank is a terrorist and they should just be shot dead on the spot. They're getting completely out of control there. Now, speaking of completely out of control, ABC News claims to have a poll showing that most Americans sympathize with Israel in the Israel versus Palestinian conflict. This appears to be a push poll to generate numbers that will put pressure on Obama to basically cave into Israel's agenda. We're coming to understand right now that Obama is so paranoid and cut off from the rest of America that he is dependent on media polls and whatever his advisors and staff are telling him, which is subject to bias and influence like anything else in Washington, D.C., and he's dangerously out of touch with what's going on here in Main Street America. We ran our own poll on whatreallyhappened.com to double-check ABC's numbers, and we came in, as of the last check, 97% of the respondents support Palestine, and only 3% supported Israel, which is rather close to the actual percentage of pro-Israelis versus the rest of the population in the United States here. So Israel has clearly lost the war for the minds of America. Now, they're getting ready for more talks over in Iran, the P5 or G5 plus 1. And they're getting ready for more talks. They've set the agenda for the new talks. And the Iranian diplomat is saying the world powers' proposals are not sufficient. They don't see a path through to a settlement. Well, the reason for that is, under the goading of the United States of America, the G5 plus 1 agenda is, you, Iran, must do what we want first, then afterwards we'll decide if we're going to reduce the sanctions. And that's the negotiating tactic that is intended to fail. And it's intended to sabotage any talks and leave those who did not want the talks with the political cover of, hey, we tried, we sat down, Iran wouldn't agree to us. Now, Iran's position is that if the Western powers, mainly the United States and Israel, will back off the sanctions, Iran will back off 20% enrichment. But the attitude of the United States, and it's an attitude they've inherited from Israel, is you give us what we want first, and then maybe afterwards we'll decide if you deserve a little concession from us. And history has shown in Israel's dealings with the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Egyptians, Israel never comes through with anything. And of course, this is just a repeat of the standard hypocrisy about Iran. Oh, they may have a nuclear bomb in the future. That's dangerous and destabilizing. But Israel has nuclear bombs, won't sign the NNPT, won't allow IAEA inspections, but they're cool. Now, meanwhile, Iran is finally bringing to trial 18 people over their involvement in the assassination of the country's nuclear scientists. Remember, a while back, Iran's top nuclear scientists were being killed. And Iran caught some of the perpetrators. I'm going to put them on trial. We may see some very interesting revelations coming out of that. Up in Germany, one of the German lawmakers has described the current director of the IAEA, Amano, as a U.S. puppet in his handling of Iran's nuclear energy issue. And that's absolutely true. When al-Baradei was in charge of the IAEA, they went into Iran, they looked around, said, we didn't find anything. Now under Amano, the IAEA goes into Iran, they look around, they say, we don't find anything, but we still think they're guilty. Which is Amano saying that the IAEA can't actually do the job they're supposed to be doing. So we ought to shut them down, fire all those people, and save a few bucks that way. Now down in Venezuela, Maduro, who is the acting president until the elections can happen, has gone public requesting Barack Obama to end a plot by the CIA to kill his opposition rival in the hopes it will trigger a coup d'etat before the April 14th election. Meanwhile, the United States is out there vowing to protect South Korea with nuclear weapons amid rising Korea tensions. Well, I got to tell you, when the U.S. goes in and says, we've got nuclear weapons, we're going to start waving around, that's what's raising the tensions. The tensions were just fine until the U.S. wandered in there with this attitude of, we can have nuclear weapons, but you can't, and started running military exercises off the shores of North Korea. That's a provocation. And started hitting North Korea with sanctions. It's the U.S. that has created this situation over there. And they originally started up with North Korea because they wanted to be able to wave North Korea around to say, see, it isn't just Israel's enemies that we're sending your children to die in wars against. North Korea is over there. Israel doesn't care about North Korea. Now, of course, North Korea is the doorway to war with China. And the agenda with war with China is to prevent the gold yuan from replacing the dollar as the global reserve and trade currency. And to stiff China on all the money that the U.S. borrowed from them. We don't have to pay you back now. We have a war. Who cares if it costs a couple of million of our kids? They couldn't find work anyway. And this gets right back to what I was saying in that article, all wars are banker wars. Because all of a sudden, you'll notice we have all these Ponzi scheme private central banks teetering on the edge of collapse, and the closer they get to that collapse, the louder and more strident the calls for global war are becoming. It's not a coincidence. We have seen this pattern before. Crash of 1907, oh, we've got to get into World War I. Crash of 1929, oh, we've got to get into World War II. Crash of 2008, oh, we've got to get into World War III. It's a sick, repeating pattern, and it is time for it to stop. Now, this month, of course, is the 10-year anniversary of the invasion and conquest of Iraq, because they were selling their oil for the euro. How dare dare they do that? You were all told this nonsense about weapons of mass destruction and Al-Qaeda and 9/11, but that was the real reason to go into Iraq. They were selling their oil for euros. It was undermining the dollar. Actually, the Federal Reserve has pretty much done a good job of that already. Anyway, we're looking at like this situation down in Florida, and it reeks of a setup and a fraud to sell the idea of domestic terrorists so they can have TSA checkpoints at your shopping malls and the bus stations and the train stations. And as it becomes obvious to most Americans that there really isn't an Al-Qaeda other than these fakes we've been talking about, Adam Perlman, Joseph Cohen, Zachary Chesser, and all these other frauds. Remember, they busted an Al-Qaeda cell in Palestine, and it turned out to be a bunch of Mossad agents. The FBI is obviously on a campaign of frame-ups, setups, entrapments, and outright fakery. They're trying to convince you there's a domestic terrorist threat. They're starting to call patriots who talk about the Constitution potential terrorists, to scare you back into the embrace of the federal government. I don't think it's working. I'm not seeing that it's getting a lot of traction. But we may be in for more false flag attacks here in the United States of America. The FBI blows up something like the Oklahoma City federal building, and oh, those gosh darn American patriots, we must get tough with them. A lot of people are still commenting about this story that surfaced last week where Obama went to this luncheon sponsored by the Republicans to have a little get-together over the budgetary difficulties. And they were serving lobster, and Obama refused to eat because he didn't have his official food tester with him. Now, again, food testers are right out of the Renaissance, and it wouldn't work anyway if somebody put a toxin in the food that was going to take 48 to 36 hours or even a month to do him in. But if he's got an official food tester, that's a paranoid symptom. Now, we know during his first term, there was actually an article came out that said Obama was dealing with tremendous depression. And he may be on SSRIs, prescription antidepressants. And if he is so paranoid right now that he's got to have a food tester, that explains a lot of what we're seeing going on. It certainly explains why the United States Secret Service was checking my wife and I out before Obama's last Christmas vacation. They had a guy come over to this Feed the Hungry program that we're volunteering for and try and act like he was part of the congregation and check us out. It's okay, we made him carry all the heavy stuff. But Obama apparently is blurring that line between political opposition and direct physical threat. And that's something that should worry a lot of people as they start talking about drone strikes inside the U.S. borders. Going to make people a little nervous. Little tiny nervous here. Now, the good news is, over the weekend, a federal judge has ruled the so-called national security letter is unconstitutional. And the government, in theory, is supposed to stop. I don't think they will. They're not concerned about legality and constitution any longer. But at least some judges are standing up to what's going on. I'm going to take a break for commercials. I'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm getting some comments from people about how the feed from RBN to Justin is somewhat garbled. And I think that's because this new Belkin router is not handling the traffic as smoothly as my old Linksys used to do. So I'm probably going to try and order a Linksys router because it's not available at the local stores anymore. It's Belkin all the time. You will take what we want to sell you and you will like it. Because a lot of people said, why didn't you get a better router? This was all they had on the shelf. Absolutely here. Now, looking over at the corporate media, they're going on and on about Syria. Syria's the problem. Kerry says we have to go out. We have to deal with Syria. They're in full distraction mode over what just happened in Cyprus, where the Cyprus government and the bankers just said, yeah, we screwed up. And we lied and we cheated and we defrauded and we made some really bad choices, but we're going to make you pay for it. And because tax revenues have all but vanished in these countries, because everybody's wages and salaries are plummeting, they're going to go right to the people who still have money, the bank customers. It is a robbery of the people. to prop up the banks under color of law. I got an email from somebody saying, well, look, if this is the law in Cyprus, that makes it okay. No, it doesn't. Everything Nazi Germany did was the letter of the law. If that made it okay, why did we go to war with them? Now, I know the real reasons for going to war against Germany had to do with the fact that the Nazis kicked out their private central bank and went back to a value-based currency, and it was doing really well, which scared the heck out of all the private central bankers in the world. But for those who still believe the official mythology about why we went to war against Nazi Germany, because they were doing bad things, everything they did was the letter of the law. And everything that Cyprus is doing is the letter of the law. Everything the U.S. government is doing is the letter of the law, including the drone strikes. Oh, yes, it's legal for us to just kill people around the world and even inside our own country because the president said so, and that makes it okay. Now, there's an interesting little story about that. Over the weekend, Obama came out, and in response to the fact that other nations of the world are now bringing their own drones online, now Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize president who has been raining robotic death down on innocent civilians all around the world, is now saying there needs to be international controls on drones, because now he's worried somebody else's drones might be flying into our country to kill people that couldn't be stopped. So he's backpedaling on this idea that we have the right to send drones anywhere. Oh, wait, they've got drones to send back? Well, maybe we ought to cool down. Now, interestingly enough, we are looking at yet another major winter storm coming in to Europe and even the United States. This is the middle of March. Spring officially begins Wednesday, and the snow is still piling up. Gosh darn that global warming. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as I said before, we're getting all this reporting from all across the United States and Europe of more winter weather, and spring officially begins on Wednesday. Over at cphpost.dk, headline, winter coming back with a vengeance. Traffic problems could still arise from today's weather. Snowstorm warning for tomorrow is still in effect. Arctic weather brings fresh snow to the north. This is from in the local.de. We've had the coldest March in Tennessee since 1960. Temperatures are just slightly over what they were on January the 1st. Over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain, winter back with a bang. Airports shut, trains delayed, roads flooded after heavy snow. Temperatures to plunge to minus 15 degrees centigrade tonight. Belgium had their coldest night of the entire winter on March 15th. When are you going to realize that this whole human-caused global warming hysteria was a gigantic fraud? Just like the mortgage-backed security fraud, just like Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Do you understand? You are ruled through lies, deception, fraud, and trickery. Because the government knows you are taught to tell the truth as a child and to expect you are being told the truth, which gives the liars a psychological advantage. That's all power is. The willingness and ability to do things ordinary people cannot or will not. That's all power is. You go to church, the guy in the funny robe at the front says, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." And yet government bears false witness to you all the time. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iran is getting weapons of mass destruction. The economy is doing fine. Go to church and the guy in the robe at the front says, "Thou shalt not steal." Government steals all the time. Cyprus just proved that. And they may call it taxation or levy or excise or whatever other name they're going to put it, but that's basically it. When they take money away from you and give you nothing in return, that is theft. We, the American people, voluntarily, gladly pay taxes for roads, schools, hospitals, education, things like that. Medicare, care of those who are in need. When the government takes that money, and instead of the roads, schools, and hospitals, they spend it on wars and Wall Street bank bailouts. And Israel, that's usurpation. And of course, you go to church and the guy in the robe up front says, "Thou shalt not kill." And yet the U.S. government goes out committing mass murder, whether they call it execution, collateral damage, termination without prejudice, or war. That's all power and authority is. They do things you cannot or will not. That's all it is. That's all power is. Now, the carbon Nazis are still out there screaming about global warming and greenhouse gases, and they're encouraging everybody to go vegetarian because, of course, cows will consume plants that eat carbon dioxide and then they will put out methane, which is bad. But when you're growing vegetables, you're still just as much damaging the environment. And you're running the risk of course, exposure to GMO. Going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And you might want to call in and share what you think the impact of the events in Cyprus is really going to be. Because as far as the American corporate media is concerned, it's no big deal here. We're going to wave Beyonce at you again. But obviously this is a serious situation. Max Kaiser is out there saying that he is absolutely convinced there is a 99.9% probability of total and utter collapse sometime before the end of April, saying that China pulling out of propping up American debt could well be the trigger. Ooh, bad China, bad China. Because China is buying up gold, which means the central banks that are trying to make good on the bullion that they were entrusted with by other countries can get less of it. And of course, China is investing in their own gold-backed currency. And that's the reason the U.S. wants to go to war against them. Exact repeat of what happened in Libya. Gaddafi came up with a gold-backed currency, the gold dinar, and it threatened to displace the dollar all across Africa, if not the world. So attack Libya. Kill the leadership. Get rid of the gold dinar. Put a private central bank in there. And now they're seriously considering doing that to China. I'm sorry, China's going to be a little bit harder to conquer than Libya was. Absolutely absurd. Now, over at the New York Times, they're now reporting, and this may be one of the reasons why the stock market sort of kind of did okay today despite Cyprus. The Federal Reserve is now saying they will not end stimulus. Remember they were talking earlier about, we're getting into hyperinflation, we're destroying the value of the dollar, we've really got to stop this. Now they're saying, the decision was maybe a little premature. The recovery has been slower as a consequence of ending stimulus. So now they're out there trying to reassure investors, you can go on buying in the stock market. We'll give you the money at, 1% interest, and you can go out there and speculate with wild, reckless abandon. And we'll keep the market going up so you'll make money. Then you can pay us back and keep a little for yourself. That's what's going on out there. It's got nothing to do with the underlying value or earnings of the companies. It is runaway, rampant speculation. And by the way, looking at the markets right now, they were briefly in the green. Now they're starting to slide back down again. I notice the volume is starting to pick up as well. I think even the most diehard money junkie in Wall Street is smelling tulips in the air over there. Meanwhile, talking about this whole sequestration situation, it's getting a little weird out there. The U.S. government, remember, a memo from the Obama administration was leaked out where Obama was telling U.S. government agencies, when you start making cuts for the sequestration, make them where they're going to cause the most pain to the public, to prove that the Obama administration was right in its dire warnings and prognostications. And by the way, as a little side note, my wife and I were back last Friday with our Feeding the Hungry program. And a lot of the volunteers helping us are federal government employees. We have a huge federal military presence on this island. We have the highest per capita density of military bases of any state in the United States. They're all being told they're going to be put on furlough. They're starting to joke that the next time we have the homeless program, they're going to be on the hungry program, they're going to be on the other side of the table. So they're all scared and nervous about this stuff. So anyway, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is preparing to start putting meat inspectors on furlough. Now, they're not just going to hold up the meat. It's going to be sent to the stores without inspection. Can you say salmonella? I knew you could. And that will cause pain, and then the government will come back and say, oh, well, if you want salmonella-free meat, you've got to agree to tax increases so we can put the meat inspectors back on. Meanwhile, Democrats are preserving this U.S.-Mexico cooperative food stamp partnership. They're still spending money taking care of the illegal aliens who ought not to be here. At the same time, they're cutting essential health services for the legal citizens of this country. Just amazing. Amazing stuff out there. Alrighty. It's just really absurd. By the way, in response to the bludgeoning I got last week over my focus on the Catholic child molestation problem, and we did post a story about a Baptist last Friday. Apparently, there is a gentleman by the name of Yaakov Yitzhak Rata who was convicted of rape and sentenced to 16 years at the Mayasayu, who, I mispronounced that horribly, prison religious wing, was released from jail to become a rabbi, a position he inherited from his father who died during his imprisonment. So you've got this convicted sex offender is released from jail to become a rabbi. So it's not just the Catholics. Kind of an unfortunate story, and this is coming out of CBS. A mother kills husband, 2 kids, and herself. Very young woman, very attractive. Apparently, murder-suicide. The mother pulled the trigger, and they're all saying, we have no idea why. Crime scene investigators and technicians back for a second day looking for evidence to explain why Angelica Vasquez took the lives of her husband and children and then herself. Friends and family and neighbors can't believe a family this happy would meet such a tragic end. The one question they're not asking, was she on or withdrawing from prescription antidepressants? It is a classic pattern. Go over to ssristories.com and you will read thousands of cases just like it. Perfectly normal, happy people. Doctor says, oh, you need an antidepressant. Yes, doctor, I trust you. TV says you're all good and honorable people. And they go on those medications and there is a bad reaction. And I've been through this myself. So I know how real it is. And nobody wants to talk about it. This is the biggest drug problem our nation faces right now. Now, apparently, over at Fukushima, they are developing problems with the electrical power supporting the cooling of the reactor fuel rod pools. Now, let me explain why that's happening. Apparently, 3 of the fuel pools have lost their cooling. And you would think 2 years afterwards, why would this be a problem? Well, you need to understand reactor fuel rods, when they're no longer usable to create electric power, they are still highly radioactive, and the byproducts of the fission process, mostly plutonium, are still decaying, and the decaying produces heat. And without cooling, the heat can reach the point where the fuel rods will spontaneously combust, catch on fire, and pour highly radioactive smoke into the sky. And so long after these fuel rods are no longer part of the actual power reactor, they have to be kept in special cooling pools filled with chemicals that will limit neutron flux. They have to be kept separate from each other on racks to prevent spontaneous fission from taking place. And they have to be kept cool. And apparently 3 of the Fukushima cooling pools are now broken. And so the temperatures are starting to increase. Now, it's probably going to take a few days before it reaches a crisis point, but it's a reminder of just how fragile that whole situation is. By the way, I did go wandering on the beaches this last weekend, and I did find some Fukushima debris washed up on the beach, little tiny bits and pieces and stuff like that. So it is really a problem here in Hawaii. I did check it with a radiation meter. None of it was radioactive. A lot more of Japan washed into the ocean from that tsunami than just around Fukushima here. Now, another interesting story, and this gets back to what I was talking about, the SSRIs. There's a story coming out of Daily Mail that young British troops returning from combat are 3 times as likely to commit violent crimes than people who just stayed at home. Now, obviously, the idea that they have been trained to commit acts of violence may explain part of it. But remember, we had the veteran who called into this show and said the combat doctors are handing out these SSRI medications like they're candy, and they're highly addictive and may well explain why we're losing more of our troops to suicide than to enemy action right now. In fact, there was a comment within this story I linked to. Strong links between combat experience with post-deployment alcohol misuse, traumatic stress, and violence, but again, no mention of prescription antidepressants. And we know, they know it's a problem. Remember, we had that caller call into the show last week that said when he was filling out the paperwork to purchase a firearm, one of the questions on that form, are you on prescription antidepressants? So they know it's a problem. But they're out to blame the guns, because if they can get the guns, then they can come in and they can take your savings accounts and your gold and your silver and your kids for more wars. These are all acts of desperation by a banking system and a government that knows they hover at the edge of collapse, and they're all hoping for a new major world war as a distraction to get them off the hook. I don't think it's going to happen. We're coming up here on another commercial break. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and I welcome you to call on in because I'm tired of talking to myself. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We finally have a caller on the line here. And Jihad in Detroit, obviously, not the real name. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, actually, it is my real name.
It is your real name. Boy, your parents didn't like you, did they?
No, they just didn't know the true concept of the name until 30 years later.
I'd go with a nickname if I were you.
Yeah, I filed a federal court.
Like Butch or Spike or something.
I filed a federal lawsuit against a local municipality for violation of civil rights under their name. They're like, are you sure that's your name? It's funny. But anyways, I wanted to mention a lot of information to talk about. I came across from a guy named out in, I think it was North Carolina, Rod Class. You ever hear of him?
No, I can't say that I have.
Well, basically, he argued, I mean, he doesn't argue. He brings out the evidence that America is in a state of what they call emergency since 1933 because the concept of the economy being bankrupt, and when it's bankrupt, the money that they're dealing with is Federal Reserve notes and is a promissory to pay. So therefore, you never pay for anything because it doesn't satisfy the debit. You know what I'm saying? But also, he brings out he was talking about the issue of what was the act? There was a gun act that they're trying to repeal or whatever it was, and that gun act, I forgot the name of the gun act because I was just listening to him last night.
I know the one you're thinking. I can't remember the name of it, but you're right. There was legislation that was passed that did reinforce the Second Amendment. I mean, there have been all these Supreme Court decisions like John Bad Elk versus United States, where the Supreme Court said, yeah, the Second Amendment is all about military weapons in the hands of the people. And the gun grabbers are trying to pretend that they don't exist. They're hoping that the American people are sufficiently uneducated, that they don't understand. The Supreme Court's already ruled on this issue. But again, when the government gets desperate, the law is the last thing on their mind.
Yeah, very true. And the other point he was mentioning that basically the government in the United States is separate, or a separate entity or foreign entity of the United States of America. And people don't realize it because when he filed, even Jesse Ventura filed against the TSA in the Supreme Court, and they denied him his case because he filed it wrong. He gave the United States of America District court is supposed to be the district court of the United States of America. And people don't realize it, that they're that strict about that because it's separate than the United States, the corporation.
Well, I don't know if they were as concerned about the status of the U.S. government so much as they were looking for any excuse to deny the lawsuit. And so they'll nitpick and they'll look for I's that are not dotted and T's that are not crossed as a way of basically evading the issue. We've seen that on a lot of lawsuits relating to constitutionality of, well, a lot of the aspects of our current country. And the courts will simply delay because they understand once they're forced to look at the case, they really cannot rule counter to the Constitution. And so very often we'll see delays. And there's a great deal of silliness at the United States Supreme Court. I remember when the case about the Vincent Foster crime scene photos that were withheld from the public finally made it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court basically came down and said, well, dead people have a right to privacy that supersedes the public's right to know if Foster was actually murdered, and there was, in fact, a second gunshot wound on his neck. So the courts are not there to arbitrate between the people and the government. Most often, the federal courts especially are there to legitimize government tyranny.
Yeah, I agree with you because I'm dealing with the federal court aspect right now, and they're always trying to form in a jurisdiction and creating what they call corporate entity versus the pro se versus the real man. And on the last point, I just wanted to bring up was that the concept of there was an actual federal judge in Texas that I forgot. I think it was Weeder, and he came out and he slammed. It was a Weeder case. He slammed the banks, and he told them they're all dealing with embezzlement and extortion. And this was in 2012 of December. And I think it was an attorney named Weeder. I don't know the case, but a lot of people should look into that because it's factual and it's true because these guys, these corporations, they're all about the fake money, and the fake money is their money. It's not our money. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's just loaned to us. Their attitude is they own all the money in the country, and it's just a case of making you work to redeem this debt they've placed you in. That's the whole fraud of private central banking. It's a system of enslavement, of debt enslavement, and all it costs them is ink and paper to enslave entire societies so that you will surrender your work product to them in exchange for more ink and paper.
Yeah, because that all started in 1861 with the Lincoln issue because he said he got us out of slavery, but the fact is he put us in contract slavery.
Actually, no. Lincoln used his greenbacks to try and break free from the private bankers. There wasn't a private central bank at the time, but there were private bankers who were allowed to issue their own banknotes, and they wanted to fund, they agreed to fund the Civil War for 30% interest. Lincoln refused to do that. He invoked his presidential authority to issue his own currency, and it worked so well that after the Civil War was over, he indicated he was going to keep it. Then he gets assassinated, and the greenbacks are taken out of circulation, and America goes back to slavery to the private bankers. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you, Jihad. We got more phone calls when we come back from these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. Anthony in New York. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I was going to ask about Spain under Franco as far as that country's economy between 1939 and 1975. Because no one ever brings this up. I mean, you might actually be giving the European Union a compliment, I think, by calling them fascist. I think maybe more of a reason why the Spanish economy didn't function very well under Franco is because they were economically isolated by the Allied forces during the 1940s, and that's why their economy was so bad. I just don't see anybody bring up the subject matter. That's all.
Well, it was a little while ago, and we know that economy is a complex issue, and there's never any one real cause, that can explain everything that's going on. But we understand the fundamentals of what makes a fascist economic state is when the government and financial corporations are aligned together to take care of each other at the expense of ordinary people. One of my very good friends in the visual effects industry is from Spain and is old enough to have lived underneath Franco's regime. And the description of what was going on there is alarmingly similar to what's going on in this country. Ordinary people being driven into poverty and the elites incredibly wealthy. And that is the hallmark of that kind of an economy. Thank you for the call. We're going to switch over to Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing fine. What's going on?
Talking about the banks real quick. It's not a long story, but I got kicked out of my mother's house last night. And the reason I did is because I have a brother who's a banker. And it's St. Patty's Day, and I come from a large family. I got a lot of brothers. So we're sitting there, we're having our Guinness, and he picks up something, and he slides it across to me. And it's an article from CSNBC or whatever, the financial network.
Yes.
So, and we had an argument a long time ago about how the rating agencies and the mega banks were totally complicit. He denies that.
Mm-hmm.
So he slid this article in front of me, and as soon as he did, I looked right down at the bottom of the page to see where it came from, and I slid it back to him, and I said, I'm not going to read it. And I said, the fact that you would put that in front of me is really insulting. And, I love my brother.
Mm-hmm.
But those guys really do think that they are the smartest guys in the room. Because
yeah, they really do, but they're just the crookedest. I mean, that was what we learned in Enron.
Yeah, it was amazing to me because after all of the evidence that I presented to him that, in fact, they were complicit, he slides one article to me and says that they weren't.
Well, you need to understand, people who are part of that banking system, they don't want to see themselves as the bad guys. And they don't want to see other bankers as bad guys, no more than Catholics don't want to admit to themselves there's a major epidemic of pedophilia among the clergy. They're very much in denial. People who work in the medical establishment don't want to look at the harm that's being caused by vaccines and SSRIs. It's a belief system. It's not science. There is no science of banking. It is a religion. It's an arbitrary set of rules and beliefs that benefit the clergy, meaning the bankers, and they cling to that belief that this is the way the world is supposed to be. And so I'm not surprised at his reaction. One of our very good friends here in the neighborhood is a retired banker, and I know better than to bring up the discussion with him because, again, he's locked into his belief that this is the way life is supposed to be because it certainly benefited him personally.
Well, the greatest argument I could make with my brother was what was happening over the weekend, the situation in Cyprus. And I said, well, look at that. Look at HSBC. And the company he works for was also had to pay a fine for laundering drug money. I'm like, You launder drug money. Why does this seem so far-fetched that you laundered house money? It's the same thing. And he just couldn't see the forest for the trees, man. And it was
he
really
doesn't want to see it.
me.
He doesn't want to see it. He doesn't want to see himself as a bad guy. And, that's why you have people like Lloyd Blankfein wandering around saying, I'm doing God's work here. I'm the good guy. It's mass deception. I mean, your most evil villain in life is going to see themselves as the good guy, and you're never going to convince them. Unfortunately, that is where wars and revolution come from, because it turns out to be easier to kill these people than to change their view about themselves.
Yeah. Well, where it got heated was when he said, well, these are matters of finance that you can't possibly understand.
Oh, boy, talk about the last refuge of the scoundrel on that one here. We do understand matters of finance. It's all about that 11th marble.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I'm real good with addition and subtraction. That's basically all you need to understand finance.
Yeah, well, what I'll do is I'll go to somebody and I'll say, let's pretend I'm the Federal Reserve and you are the country, its businesses, its people, its government. I loan you a Federal Reserve note. It flows through circulation. You pay it back. Hey, where's that 10 cents interest you owe me? You don't have it because it doesn't exist, and there is the debt trap. All righty, we've got to let you go, and we're going to move over to Nick in Japan. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Long-time listener. Absolutely love your show.
Thank you.
I've got basically not to play a poor devil's advocate, but I wanted to kind of ask you, are we sort of making the mistake of looking at them and us? Or rather, are we making the mistake of not seeing the relationship between them and us?
What do you mean by them?
Well, the corporations. It seems to me that we are sort of, we're putting our money in their banks, if you will. In many cases, we don't have the choice whether or not we're going to do that. Well, I mean, we do have the choice of, say, purchasing certain products, like, the Coca-Cola that you have right behind you. No offense.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we all do it. That's a luxury product. We make the decision to purchase their products when we don't really have to. All I'm trying to say is that in some sense we have some sort of social responsibility. We do to an extent, but Coca-Cola isn't the problem with this country. I mean, you're absolutely right. People who are concerned about the adverse health impacts they do play a significant role. I mean, that's arguable. I understand that. But I just think it's a little disingenuous. I'm from Hawaii, too. And so I'm not calling to what I'm trying to say is that we all make this mistake. We do purchase products that we absolutely do not need to purchase. And it seems like we've set up the situation of suggesting that it's them and it's not us. They don't come from some foreign. They are. I have to be very. Hang on. Let me just get something in here. We can talk about the adverse health consequence of certain products, and we can avoid them. In some cases, we're not being told. You look at what happened in California with Proposition 37, where Monsanto came in and they threatened the California government to basically yank all of the jobs they had in there. They threatened the media to cancel all advertising contracts if they didn't oppose Proposition 37, and Proposition 37 went down to defeat. There are even indications of massive vote fraud. So if the ordinary American consumer is not being informed of these problems in products coming from the corporations, they can't make a good choice whether or not to use it. But the real issue here is American financial support of corporations that they don't have a choice in. And I'll give you a good example. Following the American Revolution, banks were an option in American society. The government issued the currency flowed through commerce. You could go through your entire life without putting your money in the bank or having to go to the bank for a loan. It was an option, and it was a naturally stable system because as people got more into debt, they would slow down on borrowing until they could pay the debt off, and the system was naturally stable. With the advent of the private central banks, the First Bank of the United States, the Second Bank of the United States, and now the Federal Reserve, you've lost that freedom to say no. Everything goes through the bank. When you use any currency anywhere in circulation, you are using the proceeds of a loan that is generating interest while it's in your possession. And banking became mandatory in everybody's life. And of course, beyond that, we have all of these bailouts, TARP, this runaway inflation that is destroying the value of the money we've already worked for in order to preserve the banks. And now starting in Cyprus, direct looting of our savings and checkings account to prop the banks up. Nobody in America volunteered for that. This is corporate financial power in alignment with the government against ordinary citizens. And that is what we're talking about. Coca-Cola, is a successful company. And yes, when they originally made their product, it did have cocaine in it. It was highly addictive, and they made a lot of money off of that. Same way that cigarette makers made a lot of money over the fact that their products were addictive. And now they're out here with the electronic cigarettes to try and build that market again. But you're right. Americans have a choice regarding those products, and many Americans do choose. My concern is with those corporations who have gamed the system so that they can suck wealth out of our society, and the American people no longer have a choice whether or not they're going to go along with that. So we need to differentiate between, which corporations we're talking about here. All right? So thank you. I'm going to let you go at this point. We're going to switch over to Scott in Virginia. Scott, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for having me on. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Listen, I have two things I want to call about quickly. The first one is you keep getting a hard time about reporting news about Catholic priests, abusing children, and somehow you're expected to give equal attention to other religions, whether or not they have the same amount of problem going on at the time or not. And I just sparked the memory that I had that back when Jim and Tammy Jim and Tammy Faye Baker and Jimmy Swaggart were going through their scandals, I don't remember any Baptist or Protestant saying, hey, Catholics are picking on us, stop it. Let's talk about priests instead. No, we were all aghast at what was going on in our own church. And yes. We didn't try to put the blame somewhere else. And I do want to say something. Not many Americans know this, but the Holy See, the Catholic Church, the Holy See was not allowed to have an embassy in the United States until 1984. From 1776 to 1984, the Holy See was not allowed to have an embassy in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And I think it'd be very interesting if people do their own research about why. Now, that doesn't mean all Catholics are bad. I'm not saying that. I'm not
saying that either. I'm not saying that either. And again, it isn't the pedophilia that is the problem so much as the cover-up of this problem and the refusal to deal with it, which undermines this claim by all religions that they represent some kind of a divine supreme moral authority.
I agree with you. Now, the real reason I called was because you're talking about finances, the banks. Mm-hmm. Another interesting fact that I just learned recently, I've never heard in the news, is the fact that the CIA black budget has a massive amount of money in the private industry. And the reason they've grown so much is because a lot of government agencies, state and federal, like to use the CIA's black budget to bypass acquisition rules. When the state or federal government buys things, they have to send it out to bid. Well, if they can go through the CIA black budget, they can reward their political buddies, some of these state agencies and federal agencies, yes, and bypass the normal approval process. Now, they can only do it to a certain extent, but they do it, and the CIA gets something out of it as well. And I don't know if many people know this, but it's coming out, and it's big news. AIG was started by Cornelius van der Star, who was one of the founders of OSS, before the CIA became the CIA. Mm-hmm. Now, apparently, it seems like AIG is really a CIA front.
There's a lot of them out there. I mean, the term of craft is a CIA proprietary. Like Brooks Jennings and Associates was a CIA proprietary until it was outed by the Bush administration. The Fodor's travel guides began as a CIA proprietary because it was a great cover for agents on the ground in other countries. Hi, I'm from Fodor's Travel Guide. Oh, please come in. Let me show you this. Let me show you that. National Geographic provides cover for CIA agents. It is a huge situation. Evergreen Air is a CIA proprietary, sort of the modern-day inheritors of Air America. There's a lot of them out there, and they enjoy special privileges with the government. Look at the situation where they were going to charge all these Blackwater executives with all of these felony crimes, and they got off with a couple of wrist slaps. So, yeah, it's a major polluter of the American economic and society.
Well, for anybody that wants to research this, I would suggest them to look up Leroy Fletcher Prouty. He's a former chief of special operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff under JFK.
Oh yes, I'm very familiar with him.
He also went into banking, and from what he says, from the 50s on, CIA employees have been investing in countries, especially in South America, prior to any U.S. action. They would go ahead and go in and either buy land or invest in companies that are down there prior to a CIA action, whether it be an overthrow or securing the government that's in power. And that they were making tons of money by this type of
yeah, when you know something like this is going to happen, you're in a position to exploit it financially quite easily. It's sort of a global version of insider trading. You've got information the other people don't have. And it's a heck of an opportunity, and that's why some of these old guard, high-level CIA agents are so fabulously wealthy themselves.
And I would question whether even if these operations were necessary, if maybe it was the financial incentive that spurred them to begin with.
Could very well be. Could very well be. I mean, we know that a lot of the insiders on the whole Iran-Contra gun and drug running down to Nicaragua, they made millions of dollars off the deal.
Here's a scary aspect to this whole thing. And if people want to look this up, they look up Ken Cosgrove. He's a former software salesman who dealt with AIG. He says that the CIA, one of the easiest ways to launder money, other than going through big banks that they basically run, is to also go through software companies, because the value of the software is basically whatever you state it is, and that is a perfect avenue for money laundering. And he says the CIA is so deep in with software companies that they have back doors in a lot of these proprietary software systems, and one of them, the big one, is Sarbanes-Oxley software that everybody went to in right after Enron.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happens that it's the salesman, Ken Cosgrove. You can look him up on the Internet.
I know the name. Listen, we've got to take a commercial break. Hang on, because I want to respond to something that you said when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with Scott in Virginia. And to back up a little bit on what you were talking about, Fletcher Prouty is a very interesting character. If you remember Oliver Stone's movie on JFK, there's the mysterious Mr. X, played by Donald Sutherland, who comes up and tells Jim Garrison what's really going on with the assassination of the president. That character is based in large part on the writings of Fletcher Prouty. So I'm sure most Americans are familiar with his comments and views, even if not his name. Now, as far as software having back doors, there's nothing new with that. The National Security Agency has been caught playing this game with a lot of companies, going all the way back to Crypto AG in Europe, where they will simply go into anybody that has encryption and they will make sure there's a back door. The original specification for DES, the data encryption standard, includes something politely known as the work reduction packet, which was the encryption key re-encrypted using a key that only the NSA had. Clipper had a built-in back door that they were trying to say, key escrow. The key will be broken in half, and two separate agencies will have the two halves, and it will take paperwork to get both halves of the key. The secret they didn't want you to realize is if you had one of the two keys, you could find the other computationally. And the NSA's got 3 acres of supercomputers that they're using to read your traffic. There was an early version of Microsoft Windows that came out to developers that somebody had accidentally left the symbol table information in the compiled code, which revealed the NSA key inside Microsoft's encryption architecture. So if you have secrets to keep, if you're using any commercially available product or even the stuff they hand out for free over the Internet, you're being a fool. For one thing, breaking an encrypted message is a 2-step process. Finding the methodology, and once you have the methodology, finding the keys. Of the two, the first one is the most difficult. The Allies were not able to break Enigma until they captured a physical machine and then knew the methodology. After that, the large machine they built at Bletchley Park could brute force the keys. So if you're using a commonly known encryption method, you've already given the NSA the hard part of the solution. And that's the way that operates. So we know there's a lot of that is definitely going on out there. And we know that there's backdoors in all the commercial software. The only way you can be sure you don't have a backdoor is to go back to the early source code release of Unix, where you got the operating system as source code and compile it yourself. Or write your own if you've got the resources to do that.
When we bring down, the Federal Reserve's going to fall on its own whether we bring it down or not. It's not going to last.
Yeah. That's why I'm telling everybody, be patient, don't be violent. It's all coming apart on its own, just like the former Soviet Union.
Now,
we got to take a break for station identification. I'm sorry, Scott. We're going to let you go here. We've got more callers waiting online. Hallelujah. I love callers. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Back to the phones. Joel in Wisconsin. Aloha, Joel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
I was listening to another program where they talked about third-generation Holocaust survivors that we're supposed to feel sorry for. And it reminded me of more recent times when after 9/11, there's the Victim Compensation Fund that made each of the survivors of the alleged dead millionaires. And then they renewed that, I think, in 2008, or they renewed, anyway, they renewed that fund. And if anyone questions the Holocaust, they're called anti-Semitic instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you question whatever happened on 9/11, you get called anti-American. And I just wanted to make that connection.
Oh yeah, I mean that's how they reinforce the official legend. You know, you're a hater, you're a fanatic, you're crazy. They won't actually look at the factual evidence that's going on here. But I think the world has reached a point of being willing to go back and re-examine past lies. Time makes ancient truth uncouth, as the saying goes here. And knowing how badly we were lied to about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, looking at this gigantic multinational, multi-government fraud called human-caused global warming, yeah, we get lied to a lot. And prudence demands we go back and look at everything we were ever told by the state-sponsored schools, by the corporate media, by vested political interest, and re-examine it. Now, truth doesn't fear re-examination. Truth does not need laws to protect it, like the one that the Greek Prime Minister is getting ready to pass to punish Holocaust denial in Greece. You don't need a law like that when you're dealing with a true incident in history. You only need laws like that when you're dealing with a monstrous, monstrous lie. They were actually talking briefly about a 9/11 denial law in this country, where you could be prosecuted for questioning the official story. And that is usually the sign of somebody afraid that time and technology has caught up with them.
That fits right into what I was just saying, comparing the two. And I do have another thing that you may not like. Many times you say you're not supposed to believe in something. You're supposed to check it out with facts and scientific proof and stuff like that.
Yes.
And that makes me wonder why, without any proof, that you believe that an airplane crashed into the Pentagon when that...
Oh, come on. Come on. Listen, one more time. Why would the government fake that? They have to get rid of the plane and its passengers anyway. There is nothing to be gained by a fraud. Why not crash the plane into the Pentagon? What is the advantage? There's no motive. Could the government do it? Yeah, probably. Why would they bother? Yes, the government will lie, cheat, steal, and kill, but they never do it without a reason. Hundreds of people saw the plane flying towards the Pentagon. Nobody saw it flying away. And you would presume because of the very loud bang that occurred, you'd have more people looking in the direction of the Pentagon after the impact than were looking before the impact. This is a classic case of poisoning the well, where the government shills, of which this gentleman has to be one, are trying to put something nonsensical into the discussion to ridicule the entire issue. It's called poisoning the well. We saw it back with JFK, with the umbrella dart gun man, the fingerprint man. We saw it with 9/11, with this no plane at the Pentagon nonsense. It is a classic propaganda technique, but it doesn't work when you understand this is how the government plays. All right, Danny in South Carolina. Actually, no, we got to take a break for commercials here. We'll be back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And boy, the money junkies must really be scared if they're trying to drag up that old no plane at the Pentagon nonsense. Next, we're going to get calls about HARP and chemtrails and space aliens kidnapping the president and replacing him with a genetics experiment and all this other kind of nonsense. Like I said, this is a classic propaganda technique called poisoning the well. If the public discussion is getting dangerously close to an embarrassing truth, you plant some nonsense in there so the corporate media has an easy handle to ridicule the discussion as a whole. And ever since that no plane thing was put out there, we've seen it. Popular Mechanics, the corporate newspapers, anytime they start talking about 9/11, oh, those bozos don't even believe a plane crashed. No, we don't actually believe that at all. Your paid propagandists are the ones pushing that nonsense. It's an old technique. It's old enough to be shaving. And now that we all know that's what they do, we just look out for this stuff. If somebody's coming in there spouting completely nonsensical stuff that makes no sense, they're the government propagandist trying to disrupt the discussion. Because, again,
You know, with these people, you can show them all the pictures of the airplane wreckage that's inside the Pentagon first floor and the rest of it. They don't want to see it. Their job is to keep saying, no plane, no plane, no plane. And the one question they can never answer, which is when they fall back on, oh, you just hate America, you're supporting the terrorists, is very simply this. Why would anybody bother with a fraud? They've got a plane coming into the Pentagon. They have to get rid of the plane and passengers anyway. Why not crash it into the Pentagon? There's nothing to be gained taking the risk of a deception that might be uncovered by swerving the plane off and having their starship beam it up so that nobody sees it flying away. It doesn't make sense to do a deception like that. Therefore, it didn't happen. This whole no plane thing is a desperate attempt to give the corporate media an easy means to ridicule questioning the 9/11 Orthodox story as a whole. Poisoning the well. Old propaganda technique. By the way, Dan the Man is now in our control room answering your phone calls. And speaking of phone calls, we still have a couple of waiting. Danny in South Carolina. Aloha, Danny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Well, you were speaking earlier about banks and about the people who work for banks, and I wanted to relate a very brief story as a preamble to a bigger story. A couple of years ago, I was doing some research. I came across something called the SWIFT system, which is a banking protocol used for wiring money, especially internationally. So I did some research into the SWIFT system, and I decided I'd better go down to the bank and talk to the manager and get her take on it. And I went down there, and she said, oh, it's nothing. It's just the form we fill out to send money from one bank to another, you know, over a wire transfer. And I said, is that it? She said, yeah, that's it. Okay. Right in that moment is when I felt this cold chill all over my body, as they say, because that is not what the SWIFT system is. If you go to the website of the Wolfsburg Group, and that is Wolfsburg with an E, dash principles, it's been around since 2001, you find a list of the banks that are sponsoring it, and they include the Banco Santander, Bank of Tokyo, Barclays, Citigroup, Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank. All the big guys are part of the Wolfsburg Group. And their statement is pretty much summarized in their statement on the suppression of the financing of terrorism. Mm-hmm. Within this document, it goes on to describe their Know Your Customer policy, where banks are expected to have such things as your name, address, phone number, passport, or travel document number, names of friends and associates. Mm-hmm. All of these are in a bank environment, mind you. You were talking about the CIA being involved with it earlier. Mm-hmm. You can go to the WolfsburgPrinciples.com. You can read it yourself. This is not a bank. This is a sophisticated monitoring, tracking network, and they maintain, and they tell you in the literature, they maintain a database on every bank depositor in Poland.
Okay.
Now, to me, this was very scary, so I dug into it deeper, and I dug into it deeper, and I dug into it deeper. And I'm telling you that these games that we see them playing, like taking 10% of the depositors' money in Cyprus, there's more to that than meets the eye. And not only is there more to it than meets the eye, they don't have any problems with publishing the whole dang thing. The whole plot is there in black and white. They have a direct responsibility to report any suspicious character that any bank branch may see directly to the Department of Homeland Security. This is a Patriot Act compliance provision. By the way, they also will help your institution with Patriot Act compliance for a small fee. Not only do they send information to the DHS or to what they call the due diligence repository in Poland, mm-hmm. but they have the lists of people that are maintained by that depository, and when you apply for an account or whatever, they check you against that list.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of them before?
No, I have to be honest, I didn't, but I'm not surprised to see they're in existence, and my comment to that would be that it may be monitoring small terrorists, but obviously we know a lot of drug money laundering and terrorism laundering has been going on by the big banks, so this sounds like a system to keep out the small fries in the competition.
Well, that's the whole point. The banks that they list on their letterhead are all the big boys, and they're all the money laundering banks.
Mm-hmm.
This is, to me, I mean, and it does, I'll be honest with you, it's deep and it's complex, and it can't be covered in 30 minutes or less. But it's a whole microcosm unto itself, this whole system they've got set up. But what really perturbs me is with all this moaning that Americans do about privacy, is that all of our information, as soon as it's typed into the computer of whatever branch you're at, of whatever bank you're in, ends up on the database in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And God knows who has access to that.
As you say, for a small fee.
Well, they sell the software.
Well, I presume they're probably going to sell that database as well, not just to the Department of Homeland Security, but anybody who's, they are a law unto themselves. There are no international controls on these databases that are being created.
Well, I heard what you said earlier. I know a little bit about these things. I realize that that all these updates I keep getting from Microsoft, and God help me, even Adobe Acrobat, they're more, they're ubiquitous, and there's more in there than just patching little security.
Oh, we know that. We absolutely know that. That's an assumption right now, that the government has a backdoor into your computers. I remember reading a book many years ago. I think it was called The Zen of Macintosh by one of the early developers, who was forced out supposedly over the issue of Apple allowing the government to put backdoors in all the Apple products the way Microsoft had done with the NSA key. And it led to a spirited debate inside Apple's hierarchy, and the ones who didn't want to go along with that were basically driven out of the company.
Well, it's staring us in the face who these people are,
mm-hmm.
what they're doing, and how they're doing it.
It's a fascist economic governmental system, and we know it. And again, it's part of a campaign to keep us all scared and obedient and compliant. But in the long run, they can collect all the data they want. They probably got way too much to make any real sense of. Anybody who really does have secrets to keep, real terrorists, if there are any, and criminals and drug lords are going to have their own parallel systems set up and even the money laundering banks, I'm sure, have got their own parallel systems set up that nobody's monitoring. We're just now finding out the Catholic Church has a completely separate financial network off the books of the Vatican Bank that nobody even knew existed up until now.
Well, Michael, as the Bible says, let he that hath wisdom read and understand. Anyone who's interested, get on to the Wolfsburg-Principles.com website and read the horror for yourself. But it is so big, it is so deep, and it is so complicated. I don't see any way to gracefully back out of this mess.
Oh, well, I don't think there is anyway, especially because we don't see the political will within any governments to back out of it, because these private central banks are generous campaign contributors. We're just going to have to sit here patiently and deal with the hardships until it all comes crashing down. And it looks like that crash is imminent. And then we need to be prepared to take care of ourselves off the network corporate grid while we build a new government. And we build the new government learning from the mistakes of the last one. No private central banks, no private central banks, no private central banks. And go back to the wisdom of the founding fathers of this nation that understood private central banking as the common enemy of all mankind. Got to let you go here, Danny. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with another phone call after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We got more callers on the line. We've had some really good callers today, with one notable exception here. Dan in Seattle. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Happy Monday to you.
Happy Monday to you, too.
I'm kind of scared to bring up my question now after that whole Pentagon fiasco. Don't shoot the messenger, Mike. I'm just asking your opinion on a theory I heard. It's not my theory.
Okay, well, go ahead. Let me have your theory.
Okay. Well, I heard this on a YouTube video last night, and I was just going to get your opinion on it. So this whole thing, it's regarding Fukushima, okay? I'll make it quick for the interest of time. Okay. So this gentleman says, in 2009, there was an ICBM launched from North Korea. They track it over Japan. Our radar ships pick it up, determine it's headed for Maui. About when it's just seconds within reaching its final stage to boost on the way to Maui, it fizzles out and drops in the ocean. Mm-hmm. So apparently there's some reports in the news. Japan kind of hem and haws about it. They launched a missile over their country. Apparently that's what's in the news. This guy says Japan was just livid about it. Tells Obama, you better get your missile defense systems over here and park them in our parking lot real quick, or we're going to build our own nuclear weapons. Obama says, nope, not going to do it. So they start building up in their one nuclear plant that could handle it, Fukushima, plans to build their own nuclear weapons. In the meantime, Russia has made an agreement with Iran for $1 trillion to give them enough enriched uranium to supply 5 nuclear bombs.
I'm going to kind of cut you off here because I can see where this is going. Just because it's on YouTube, doesn't mean it's necessarily true. I love that commercial they have for the insurance company where there's the really cute girl saying, there's nothing, if it's on the internet, they can't lie on the internet. And they're deliberately making her a bimbo for that whole point. First of all, North Korea, their longest range missile is the Taepodong 2, which does not have the range to reach Maui, can't even really reach Alaska, and the one time they tested it, as you point out, it kind of blew up in flight. So the Japanese nuclear facilities for enrichment are not located at Fukushima. They're further south along the coast, and there was, in fact, a major radiation release there as well following the quake and the tsunami. So it sounds to me like there's a lot of misinformation being put out to demonize North Korea, coincident with the attempt to get a conflict going over there as well. Now, you're not suggesting that the quake and tidal wave at Fukushima was anything but a natural event, are you?
The theory is, and I've seen pictures of it, that an Israeli, or a Mossad, team disguised as a Israeli security force, but these security cameras in Fukushima months before it happened, you look at those cameras, they look an awful lot like the diagrams of the gun-tight nukes. I was just curious your take on it. I don't know what to believe. So,
well, I wouldn't believe much on that one because, again, were Japan considering nuclear weapons, and I understand they actually are. They're looking at overturning their constitutional ban on nuclear weapons. But it looks to me like this is an attempt to demonize North Korea, possibly even Japan itself. I don't know why, because they're going to be our ally in a possible war against China and North Korea. But I wouldn't give too much credence to this one at all. And again, Japan, it has a technological base. I don't think they would bother with gun-type nuclear weapons because they have enough plutonium to go with a classic implosion-style bomb, which is more controllable and certainly smaller device to hoist. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that. We're going to go to Travis in New York. Aloha, Travis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. I'd like to apologize to your call screener there. My topic is really about money and banks. Mm-hmm. You always say that you make the term that we cannot. How can we say no if we have no freedom to say no? Then we essentially have no freedom. And my main point is that we need to cut their purchasing power, or rather their profit power. And the best way to do that is taking the money out of the banks. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that up to a point. Don't forget the banks can just create the money that they need. That's what all this stimulus that we're getting out of the Federal Reserve, because the consumer economy in the United States is already collapsing.
and most Americans don't have savings, so they're free from a Cyprus-type looting. But when I say banking is mandatory, you're paid with a paycheck from which money's already been taken out. You have to go to the bank and put it into the bank, so the bank can play with it on their balance sheets, and then you have to go to the bank and ask nice and polite to get some of your own money back, or to one of those ATM machines.
So they could continue this indefinitely then, couldn't they?
They could, in theory, until the value of the currency collapses. And remember, the reason the European money junkies decided to directly loot the Cyprus savings accounts was they see it as preferable to printing up more money, because when they're printing up more money, the money they already own is worth less. Inflation is eroding the value of their money just as it erodes the value of yours.
Instead of using the term simply just money junkies, could we use the term consumer junkies as well as a show of good?
No, I like money junkies a lot better. I like money junkies a lot better. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to the show. Before we go back to the phones here, the corporate media is reporting that Syrian jets have now fired rockets deep into Lebanon and struck a city there. Why would they do that? Syria has a lot of problems internally they have to deal with. This hired mercenary army that's been trying to overthrow the government for over 2 years. And a U.S. and Israel that are desperate to invade. We already know from the previous bombing strike by Israel into Syria that Israel is flying their warplanes along the Syrian-Lebanese border. And so my first suspicion in this case is that Israel flew up along the border and fired rockets into Syria to build a case for direct invasion of Syria. That's what I think is going on. Back to the phones. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
For a Monday.
I kind of know this is more like a desperation part because, and I'm starting to see like some of the patriot community buy into it, saying they got a drone that can fight, that can see if you own a gun, if you're carrying a gun from 17,000 feet, or they got a drone that can snatch you off the street. They got little mini drones, and I'm starting to think with all this propaganda trying to scare us, I think they're trying to make us think they hold 4 aces and a king, when they actually don't even have 2 of a kind. Like a bluff.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. First of all, I saw that picture that was on the micro drone one. It looks like somebody took one of those toy helicopters you can get at the shopping mall for $20 and put a new paint coat on it and said, "See, we're going to fly this into your room to look at you." Well, and this only costs $27,000 from DARPA. Oh, well, I got a fly swatter. Cost me $2 down at the local hardware store. Whack! And the thing is gone. The drone that can pick you up, I mean, that one was just absurd to begin with. And you're right, as these claims of total surveillance and drone this and get more and more hysterical and unbelievable, I think they're undermining their own credibility. I think it's a big joke myself.
It's just somebody whistling real loud in a poker game, trying to bluff the other players.
It's all a bluff. That's all this government knows how to do. They bluff about global warming. They bluff about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. They bluff about a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. They bluff about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. On and on and on. It's nothing but bluff.
And the thing is, first, I notice you don't do one thing that a lot of other patriot broadcasters do. They give the money junkies and the globalists too much credit they do not deserve. They give them too much credit.
In what context? I'm not sure where I see the difference.
Well, they buy into the illusion what they can do, in reality what they really can do.
I agree with you on that. One of the articles that one of the members put up is still trying to say that this is a deliberate takedown of the dollar. No, it isn't. The money junkies do not want the dollar to fall. They don't want any of the private central banks to fall because that's the goose that is laying the golden eggs. The reality is they can't stop it from happening. And they're looking to blame some other party, like the Illuminati or some other unreachable enemy, so that the American people don't wake up and realize, as the people of Cyprus just did, that the real enemy of the people is right down on Main Street in that fancy-looking bank building.
Well, the thing is, I'm urging everybody, call their senators and congressmen. It's because, like Senator Ted Cruz says, I want you to fund Obamacare or shut the government down. Well, I'd rather just see the government just shut down, run out of money.
I agree. And it's going to happen all by itself. We don't need to start an armed revolution. We just need to stand up and tell the rest of the world, we, the people of the United States of America, do not agree with this government. We do not agree with this system of banking. We will no longer be the wallet of last resort for all the crime and corruption and war that is going on here. And it's not even a question of whether we're willing to pay these bills or not. We just can't. The money junkies have got pretty much all the money. The economy outside of Wall Street and the Beltway is starving to death for lack of liquidity, and it's just rotting on the vine. And it's all going to come down the way the former Soviet Union did.
Well, I just hope this time the central bankers print themselves and bail themselves out of existence.
Well, like I said, the one advantage to this globalist philosophy that we have seen taking hold over the last 20 years is it opens up a situation where all these private central banks are going to come crashing down at the same time. And that means that as nations break free of private central banking, there won't be other nations that are still slaves to the private central banks to declare war on them and force them back into the slave system. And so that is probably the new consciousness that we're going to have to see on planet Earth, to recognize that private central banking is a form of dominance and control, rule by artificially created debt, and it is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those earlier failed systems, it only works as long as people believe that's the way the world is supposed to be.
Well, you know, the thing is, everybody says, oh, they're going to seize the bank accounts here. As long as the people are armed, I don't think the government or the banks will dare try to siphon people's bank accounts.
Well, I wouldn't be too sure about that. I mean, I don't know how many people in Cyprus have guns, but the reality is they can take your money just with a couple of strokes on a keyboard. As long as your money is in that bank, it is open season on your accounts here. And I'd like to find out from the listeners how many of you feel that your money is safe in the American banks. I think that's a question we need to start asking. I'm going to put up a poll about that after the show today.
Well, you know, the thing is, I haven't got investigated by the IRS because I started, right when I started withdrawing, I'm starting to get coin, rolls of quarters, dimes, and everything like that, because the paper dollar may crash, but, you know, the quarters and dimes and all that are still minted by the Congress. So they still have some intrinsic value.
But they're still token money. They're still token money. The only ones that have inherent value are the quarters, nickels, and dimes from before 1964. And those are going to be great, reliable barter items following the crash of the Federal Reserve. If the Federal Reserve, let me sit back up. When the Federal Reserve crashes, the modern quarters, nickels, and dimes won't be worth anything more than the paper is. Because it's a token, it's a fiat currency. That coin isn't actually worth anything.
Well, yeah, you probably have a point there, but
yeah.
But you know, the thing is, I got about $1,000 worth of Kennedy silver dollars, so I'm sitting pretty right now.
You mean Kennedy half dollars?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a little silver content in them. There's a little silver content in the Eisenhower dollars. But that actually got reduced a little while ago again. So you need to do some research as to what years of those coins have a silver content or not. Because if they don't have silver content, or if the nickels don't have real nickel in them, or the pennies don't have real copper, they're going to be as worthless as the paper dollars are following the coming crash.
Well, that's why I keep my wheat head pennies.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, you got it. A little side note, have you ever been to an amusement park and they used to have these machines where you'd put in a quarter and you'd put in a penny and you'd crank the machine and the penny would get squished and imprinted with the amusement park. It was kind of a fad for a while, certainly when I was back working at Magic Mountain many years ago during my college years. Those actually almost got put out of business by the new pennies, because back when they had the real copper pennies, you'd get a nice-looking little souvenir. But with the new pennies, it splits, that copper coloring and the aluminum color comes through, and they don't look very good at all. And I note I haven't seen any of those machines lately. So another little flash-in-the-pan public trend that sort of got destroyed by our fiat fake currency. But the reality is, when the Federal Reserve crashes, the coinage in circulation today, the modern coinage, post-1964, won't be worth any more than the paper is. If you want to start acquiring coins that will be useful for trade or barter, you need to go back before 1964. And you will pay for them because they're silver. If you go to eBay, you look for junk silver. The coinage of the Roman Empire survived the collapse of the empire because it was made out of silver and bronze and in some cases gold that represented real physical wealth in the hands of the people holding it. Not today. Our modern coinage is worth no more than your standard gas station game token and is often not made with much more quality. I remember when I was a kid, the American coinage was done very well with a lot of artistic quality. Now, because of the clad coinage, they have to shallow strike, and the coinage just doesn't look as good. If you're ever in Munich, visit the Residence Museum. They have a exhibit of numismatic coinage art, and you would be amazed how beautiful coins and medallions can be when they're done really well. American coinage used to be like that, not anymore. Get a modern quarter. Look how thin George Washington is, because they don't want that shallow, thin white metal coating to split and crack and reveal the copper underneath. It's not even a full copper compound any longer. All right, phone lines are open. We got a few more stories to talk about. Now, the corporate media is reporting that Mayor Bloomberg, fresh from his slap down by the judge over his large drink ban, is now conceding that an assault weapons ban is not likely to stand a constitutional challenge. And in order to prove that they weren't completely wasting the taxpayers' time, they're focusing on background checks for weapons purchases, forgetting that criminals who can't pass a background check are just going to break into homes that were conveniently listed by those newspapers in the New York area, or they'll break into police cars and take the guns they want. So they've failed with one policy. Now they're going to push another policy that cannot possibly work to prove how relevant they are to modern American life. Meanwhile, of course, New York still has 50,000 homeless people that Bloomberg apparently can't do a thing about, which is why he's focused on large sodas and all the rest of this nonsense. Now, earlier today, and again, part of the fluffiness, sports scores, Beyonce, Michael Jackson, and all the rest of it, and pay no attention to what's going on in Cyprus. They were screaming about how teenagers are behind on their mandated vaccines and how parents are getting very concerned about adverse reactions to Gardasil. And parents should be concerned. Apparently, there's been yet another study on this Gardasil vaccine that is finding DNA fragments floating around inside this vaccine. These are very dangerous chemicals. DNA fragments can interact with the wrong part of a genome. In nature, they're called prions, and they're responsible for a great many food crop blights, and they're pumping the same thing into people. There's been another tragedy where a 1-month-old baby went to the hospital for the World Health Organization mandated series of vaccinations and died 5 hours later. Got a caller on the line, Michael in New Jersey. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on. Two things. The nickels right now, their metal content equals their value, and the copper pennies from 1981 and earlier are worth like 3 cents in copper. So I just wanted to just give you that. So it's not just 1964 and earlier. There actually are two semi-modern coins you can keep.
Okay, well, I question if it's the value of the metal or the cost of manufacture, because I know there's a movement in Washington, D.C. to get rid of the penny because it's costing more than 1 cent each to make them. But it doesn't mean the metal value is there. It's simply the amortization of the process of creating them. So
pennies, you're correct. Yes, the current pennies are not worth 1 cent in copper, but 1981 and earlier have enough copper content for they're worth like 3 cents.
1981. All right, that's good to know. That's okay. Very, very good to know.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. All righty, we're coming up on the end of the show here, and again to recap from the beginning, what happened in Cyprus needs to be looked at by everybody in Europe and everybody here in the United States of America. The European Central Bank, the IMF, the European Union government just arbitrarily decided that because the banks of Cyprus made some bad business decisions relative to the Greek bonds, and the Greek bonds were destroyed by that underhanded deal between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs, the solution to the problem was to arbitrarily steal money from the people of Cyprus who have bank accounts. No warning. There was a rumor, but it was dismissed as a rumor by the corporate media. Oh, that was silly little conspiracy. That's not possibly going to happen. Remember, the president of Cyprus, in his campaign speech, because they're coming up on elections, said depositors in Cyprus are safe. We get that same thing from our own government. Depositors are safe. We will never allow the depositors to have a problem. So anyway, the reality is that the attitude of the money junkies is they can screw up, they can engage in fraud, they can create bubbles to get rich on that collapse and drop the losses onto the people. And when the banks get into trouble, the wealth of the people is fair game. Now, I know the people of Cyprus didn't have a chance to vote on this. Even if you call what is being done to their savings and checkings accounts a tax, it is taxation without representation because they didn't get to vote on it. They were deprived of their right to say no. And again, going back to the Constitution of the United States of America, here in the United States, there is no law that makes ordinary Americans financially liable for the mistakes and the crimes of the banks. Will that restrain the U.S. government from doing what Cyprus did? I rather doubt it. So you better watch what's going on with Cyprus. As soon as those banks reopen, there are going to be some problems. We may see bank runs in these other countries. They're already talking about having to do the same thing in Italy. And you better start making some choices about protecting your wealth. Because that guy with the gun and the nylon stocking over his face, that's not the guy you have to worry about anymore. It's the crooks on Wall Street with their Brooks Brothers suits and their $100,000 wristwatches, driving their Bugatti Veyrons. You got to worry about them. Because the easiest way to rob a bank is to own one. So, now, going to grab a couple of science stories here. We're continuing to see a lot of hemming and hawing coming out of the Curiosity mission on Mars. They're now admitting Curiosity is finding organic compounds on Mars, the chemistry of life. Then they back up. Well, are they really from Mars, or did they travel along on Curiosity? Well, if you're sending a ship to Mars, don't you sterilize it first? That's what we did on Viking. And they're still trying to hem and haw, and I think there is a political agenda to not acknowledge life on Mars because of the social impact it would have on ordinary people. Would dramatically change their perspective. People might put down their bayonets pointed at the Iranians and North Koreans and say, look, let's stop killing each other and start looking outward now that we know there is life out there. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Back with our last segment after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And CNN is going on the sports scores. We have sports for you. Pay no attention to that disaster getting ready to happen over there in Cyprus. Looks like the stock market was not able to sustain its shove up. There was a notable downturn and a huge volume toward the closing bell here, and I think everybody's getting nervous. I think too many people understand it's subject to manipulation. They can't hold us together much longer. They really, really can't. Had a listener send in an email saying, I'm putting my cash to gold and silver jewelry because in my country there is no retailer or shop selling gold or silver coins. I believe that it's better to have gold and silver in any form than these paper notes. And you're absolutely correct. You need to understand here in the United States of America, back in 1933, when Roosevelt confiscated the gold, jewelry was exempted because of the emotional attachment, especially people who had heirloom jewelry, their mother's wedding ring or something like that. So Roosevelt understood that if he went for that, the opposition to his plan was going to be greater than it absolutely was. So jewelry may be exempted the next time. I wouldn't guarantee it. But there's always a side benefit when you're investing in gold jewelry because your wife gets to wear it, and that will make her happy. Now, if you're going to buy gold as the form of jewelry, obviously you want the highest carat possible, and you need to be very careful about what is called 10-karat gold jewelry, because there's a very interesting loophole in the laws regarding gold content where 10-karat actually means 10-karat and less. And a lot of 10-karat jewelry isn't actually 10-karat. These gold repurchasing people, if they're willing to buy it at all, they're really buying it at a very, very low price because they understand they're taking a chance. If you are buying gold as an investment, you want 18 karat, at least 22 karat if possible. There is jewelry made out of 24 karat that is specifically for investment purposes, but because gold is so soft, it's not very durable. So it's jewelry you'd buy and put in your gold bin. And now's the time. Now's the time. And again, looking back at what just happened in Cyprus, and the Cyprus banker said one time will never happen again, and yet they're already talking about doing it to Italy. If they get away with it in Cyprus and Italy, it'll spread all across Europe. It will come here. Yes, the private central banks can print up all the new money they want to keep themselves solvent. But the more they print up, the inflation destroys not only the value of the money you have in your pocket, it destroys the value of the money junkies have, and they will not accept that. So their choice is find a way to take more away from the people to prop up the system, as long as the people let it happen. And again, I am not trying to incite a run on the bank, because you can be thrown in jail for that in the United States. I'm just going to repeat my common sense advice. You should only have as much money in the bank as you need to cover your obligations and keep the rest under your own control. Don't forget Republic Trading Group. If you don't have a local supplier for gold and silver, you want to go over to Republic Trading Group. Got a banner on my website, got a banner at Republic Broadcasting. They will get you set up with something to help ride out the coming crisis. I hear the music. It's time to get out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed, especially what's happening in Europe.